Greenpeace has released leaked TTIP negotiation documents.
In einem gläsernen Leseraum hat Greenpeace die geleakten Dokumente zum
Estas negociaciones de tratados se están llevando a cabo con el...
La France veut durcir le ton dans les négociations avec les
TTIP could adversely affect European citizens' rights and the environment.
Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. Here are some of the media stories we're covering this week. Trade secrets, the politics and the coverage behind the huge trade deal between the U.S. and the EU. This is Yemen TV. So is this. Two channels with distinctly different ways of reporting on the same war. Some free advice for Egyptian security officials. If you want to write an email on how to discredit journalists, don't send it to the journalists, because they'll publish it and discredit you. And can the beautiful game put the boots to an ugly idea?
These are not the nice, sweet little people that you think, okay?
At 248 pages, it's not on the scale of the Panama Papers, but this week's leak from the negotiating table of the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, or TTIP, has shed a little bit of light on trade talks that could reshape the economic relationship between the United States and the European Union, and has implications that could go well beyond trade. Any way you slice TTIP, it's a big deal, and it's one that you know very little about. That's because the TTIP negotiations are being held in secret. In fact, much of what we do know about what's on the table has come from leaks. Greenpeace, the lobby group that made this week's leak public, is among those warning that TTIP could let corporations rewrite the rules on the environment, health, product standards, and even allow them to challenge government policies that get in the way of their profits. This is an issue that seems to produce more public hostility the more information that gets out. As for the journalists trying to cover the TTIP story with so little tangible material to report on, and anyone in the know barred from revealing details, there are some high barriers to understanding what's happening behind closed doors and communicating where it could all lead. Our starting point this week is Brussels. The stated purpose of the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership is to liberalize roughly 1/3 of global trade. The stated benefits: reducing tariffs, regulatory barriers, and creating jobs. The stated risks are to things like food safety laws, environmental protections, and other domestic laws that could be trumped by an overarching trade deal. And if that isn't concerning enough for skeptics or journalists, there's the question of transparency. Even if an agreement is reached, the EU has banned the negotiating documents behind TTIP from being made public for 30 years because of their so-called sensitive nature. As for the leak,
a public debate is absolutely urgently necessary.
Greenpeace says a source, it did not say from which side, approached the organization, and Greenpeace then published the documents. Greenpeace's stated reason: to provide much-needed transparency and trigger an informed debate on the treaty.
Trade negotiations have always been kept in this sort of secrecy because you talk of economic interest. However, there's a huge public interest in knowing what's going on in these negotiations. The European Commission has been trying to be more transparent. They published their negotiation position, they published it online.
Unfortunately, the United States has not followed suit. We considered a trade negotiation between the United States and Europe as a new opportunity for a different level of transparency and openness. Two robust democracies able to have a negotiation. Unfortunately, what we've seen is doubling down of secrecy in these negotiations.
And this explains why the TTIP leaks came out and what TTIP leaks are about. Disclosing, making sure that not only the European position will be out, but also the US position will be known to the public. So this is the major game changer in this event.
The documents outline disputes over regulation. The American position: future regulations passed in the US or Europe on things like environmental protection, public health, and consumers' rights would all be subject to TTIP rules, potentially tying the hands of legislators and diminishing the sovereignty of states. As Greenpeace put it, the EU position is very bad, the US position is terrible. The prospect of compromising within that range is awful. The lobby group went on to say the talks are like a race to the bottom in environmental, consumer protection, and public health standards.
The most significant effect of this leaks is that we now know exactly what the American side wants. That's a good thing, especially from a journalistic point of view. It puts more pressure on the American side to be more transparent. And it has, of course, increased the skepticism to TTIP. We've been seeing some statements of politicians like the French President, François Hollande, who now used this as another opportunity to mark his critical position on TTIP. So it has put even the pressure on the negotiators a bit higher.
These TTIP leaks might change the way in which public opinion will become more involved, and possibly the media are going to be reporting about the complexity of an agreement, which is much more than a usual trade agreement. This is not business as usual. This is a new form of governance that require a much more inclusive process of debate and discussion.
The leak provided news organizations with a way into the TTIP story, which, given the complexities of international trade law, was challenging enough to cover, even without the secrecy shrouding the talks. Then there's the economic state of the news industry, with so many outlets shedding resources and journalists. This is the biggest, most complicated series of trade negotiations ever undertaken, and there are fewer and fewer specialist reporters who actually understand the material that has been made public, who actually get what is going on.
If you look at these texts, they're very, very difficult to understand. And I think that's a struggle for a lot of journalists. Journalists were asking me, so, okay, can you give me a specific quote? But it's not that easy. It's not only up to us to give meaning to what's in these documents. I think it's for the entire public, it's for NGOs, it's for journalists to make up their mind and start the debate around these negotiations.
One of the challenges with these types of complex trade negotiations is that the media doesn't really even know where to start. This is not a trade story. This is a story that touches on all of these different elements of our daily lives. What I think is important is that health reporters and environment reporters and financial industry reporters need to see that TTIP is directly relevant to their areas.
Ultimately, this is a story about transparency, a point that Greenpeace made symbolically when it built a glass reading room in the shadow of Berlin's Brandenburg Gate, inviting the public to peruse the documents. Greenpeace also lit up the Reichstag, the German parliament, with a projected version of what was leaked. As media stunts go, they were effective for a news cycle or two. However, in the TTIP negotiations, NGOs like Greenpeace and other non-corporate actors are saying that they, like the vast majority of citizens, are on the outside of this process, trying to see in.
What we see in these documents, a constant mention of the industry and their role. So you see, for example, phrases like, well, based on the position of the industry, based on the proposal of industry, depends on the willingness of the industry, which basically means that the ones holding the pen of the negotiators are basically the industry, whereas civil society and the public are barely involved in this process.
The European Commission says if there are exclusion issues, they're not in Brussels.
We keep an open door policy when it comes to have access to our negotiators and experts that are involved in these negotiations, that are happy to discuss and to meet the representatives of our civil society, be it from the NGOs, trade unions, consumer organizations. Our policy is to talk to everyone and to take all views on board.
That open door policy does allow for occasional access to EU negotiators. However, the media remain barred from seeing all the documents. And Brussels is only one half of the TTIP information equation. Washington, the American side, is much less forthcoming. Until and unless that changes, you can expect more leaks and a kind of journalistic trickle-down effect, leading to more stories on TTIP and more confusion in the ranks of those trying to report on it. On the download now, some thoughts on TTIP, secrecy, and the reporting of the negotiations.
Journalists around Europe, the good ones, have tried to cover TTIP and delve into what's actually going on. But such is the secrecy surrounding this whole treaty, it's proven to be impossible. They are up against a bureaucracy that is just there to slow them down, not have ease of access or have true transparency.